Tonight, we're traveling back to a time when the human story was far less certain, a time when survival unfolded through shared landscapes, quiet proximity, and lives that briefly intertwined. Long before history chose a single definition for the word human, the world was shared by more than one kind of human. Across wide stretches of Ice Age land, different human lineages lived side by side. They learned the same winds, followed the same herds, and endured the same long, cold seasons. The world did not belong to a single branch of the family, and it never truly did. For centuries, we believed that only one kind of human survived, while all others vanished completely. But when scientists finally learned to read the language written inside our cells, they found something unexpected. Genes that didn't originate with our direct ancestors, but with the other humans they lived alongside us, the Neanderthals. These genes are not carried by everyone, but in most people outside of Africa, roughly 1 to 2% of their DNA traces back to Neanderthals. That might sound small. It's not. These aren't dusty relics. They're active. Right now, they're influencing how your body works. Some of these Neanderthal genes help you fight off viruses your ancestors never encountered in Africa. Others affect whether you're a morning person or a night owl. Some influence your pain tolerance, your skin's reaction to sunlight, even the texture of your hair. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Of all the Neanderthal DNA that entered the human gene pool, most of it disappeared. Natural selection quietly removed it over thousands of generations. What remains stayed for a reason. So, what were these traits that time itself chose to keep? How did two different kinds of humans, who hadn't shared an ancestor for 500,000 years, come together to create something new? And what does it mean to carry someone else's survival story inside your own body? Tonight, we're not exploring extinction, we're exploring how connection persisted when everything else faded away. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I read all your comments, and they're one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If you're enjoying these late night explorations, a like or a subscribe would be greatly appreciated. So now, take a slow breath, let your shoulders relax, and together, let's drift back to the time when the world belonged to more than one kind of human. The Ice Age world unfolded as a wide, inhabited landscape, not a silent stage waiting for a single arrival. Across valleys shaped by ice and rivers that shifted with the seasons, more than one kind of human moved through the same spaces. Smoke rose from different camps along the same ridgelines. Footprints pressed into snow did not belong to one story alone. The land carried many rhythms of movement, many solutions to the same relentless conditions. These human groups were not divided by clean borders. Their territories softened and overlapped, flowing around migrating herds, sheltering caves and reliable water. A sheltered hollow that protected one group from winter winds might later hold another, seasons or years apart, sometimes closer than that. Paths worn into the ground were shared unknowingly, traced again and again by different hands and feet. The Ice Age landscape did not reward isolation. It favored familiarity with terrain and patience with its changes. Each group learned the land in its own way. Hunting strategies reflected bodies shaped by different histories and climates. Some relied on endurance over long distances, others on strength and careful timing. Tools varied in shape and material, tuned to local stone and local prey. Shelters changed with the wind, the cold, and the availability of wood or bone. These differences were not marks of superiority or failure. They were adaptations, responses refined through long attention to place. Among these groups were the Neanderthals, a lineage that endured through cycles of cold and brief warmth, through shifting forests and advancing ice. Their presence was not fleeting. Generation after generation learned the same landscapes, adjusted to the same pressures, and passed that knowledge forward. Their bodies reflected this continuity, built for conserving heat, for strength close to the ground, for efficiency when resources tightened. This was stability, not stagnation. To live through the Ice Age required an intimate relationship with unpredictability. Winters lengthened without warning. Familiar hunting grounds sometimes fell silent. Storms rearranged rivers and buried paths. In such a world, survival was not a moment of triumph, but a sustained practice. Knowledge mattered more than speed. Endurance mattered more than comfort. Communities that lasted did so by paying attention, by remembering where shelter held and where it failed, by adjusting habits slowly rather than forcing change. The presence of multiple human groups added another quiet layer to this world. Awareness of others moved through the landscape like an undercurrent. Signs left behind, a worked stone, the remains of a hearth, a carcass shared with scavengers, all signaled that the land was known and used. Encounters were not always direct, but they were not rare. Coexistence unfolded across time rather than moments, shaped by distance, caution, and familiarity. Seen from this wider view, the Ice Age world becomes less a contest and more a tapestry of persistence. Different human lineages occupied the same stage, adjusting in parallel, sometimes diverging, sometimes converging in subtle ways. Their continued presence reflected success, measured not in dominance but in duration. To endure for so long in such conditions was itself a kind of quiet mastery. This was the world before a single narrative hardened into certainty, a world where being human had more than one expression, each grounded in the same cold air and long nights. The land held all of them, not as competitors alone, but as inhabitants learning, season by season, how to remain. Neanderthals emerged from their world not as rough drafts of humanity, but as a form shaped slowly by long residence in demanding landscapes. Their bodies, their tools, and their habits carried the mark of deep familiarity with cold, scarcity, and physical strain. Nothing about them suggests a hurried experiment. They were the result of time pressing steadily, patiently, on a lineage that learned how to remain. Their physical form reflected this history. Compact frames held heat close to the body, conserving energy when warmth was precious. Thick bones and powerful muscles supported a life built around close work with heavy materials, resistant prey, and rugged terrain. Every movement carried efficiency rather than excess. Energy was stored, reused, and guarded, not wasted. These were bodies tuned for endurance rather than display. Inside those bodies were brains that matched the demands of their surroundings. Their capacity for thought was not smaller or simpler, but adapted towards spatial awareness, memory, and problem solving tied directly to survival. Knowing the land meant knowing where stone fractured cleanly, where animals moved when snow deepened, where wind scoured ice thin over water. This kind of intelligence lived in attention and repetition, refined over lifetimes and passed along without written record. Their tools reflected the same care. Stone was not shaped casually. It was selected, tested, and reduced with deliberate strikes that balanced sharpness and durability. Tools were carried, repaired, and reused until material itself dictated replacement. Wood, bone, sinew, and hide filled the spaces stone could not. Each object existed as part of a larger system, made to work with the body and the land together. Neanderthal life also unfolded through shared effort. Survival in Ice Age conditions required cooperation beyond convenience. Hunting large animals demanded timing, trust, and coordination. Gathering fuel and food during lean seasons depended on group memory and shared labor. These were not solitary figures wandering alone through snow. They moved as communities shaped by dependence on one another. Evidence of care appears quietly but persistently. Skeletal remains show injuries that would have limited movement or strength, yet healing continued for years afterward. Survival through such injury implies assistance, protection, and patience. Food was shared with those who could not hunt. Warmth was preserved for bodies that could not gather it themselves. This care did not arise from abstraction or sentiment, but from recognition of value beyond immediate utility. Their lives were not easy, yet they were not brutish. They balanced caution with risk, routine with flexibility. When environments shifted, their responses adjusted slowly rather than dramatically. Forest retreated, tundra advanced, prey changed, and habits adapted. This was resilience built from observation rather than force. Seen clearly, Neanderthals do not fit into a story of failure or replacement. They represent a successful way of being human, one shaped around persistence rather than expansion. Their specialization was not a limitation, but a strength matched to the world they inhabited. For a very long time, it was enough. They existed as complete humans within their moment, carrying knowledge, memory, and care through generations. Their story does not read as a mistake corrected by time. It reads as a long conversation between body and environment, spoken fluently until the world itself began to change. Ice Age Europe did not settle into a single mood. It shifted and rebalanced with little warning, pressing change into every valley and open plain. Cold deepened, then loosened its grip. Glaciers advanced, then withdrew, leaving behind altered rivers and unfamiliar ground. Forests thinned into grasslands, then returned in fragments. Within the span of a few human lifetimes, entire regions rearranged themselves, asking their inhabitants to begin again. These changes were not abstract or distant. They shaped daily decisions with quiet insistence. A hunting route learned in childhood could vanish beneath ice or floodwater before old age arrived. Familiar plants failed to return after a harsh season. Herds altered their paths, drawn by new growth or driven away by cold. Knowledge that once ensured survival required constant revision. Memory alone was not enough. Attention had to remain active, flexible, and grounded in the present. Food, never abundant, became a moving target. Large animals provided nourishment but demanded energy, coordination, and risk. Smaller prey filled gaps but required time and patience. Plant resources appeared briefly, then disappeared again beneath frost or snow. Every meal carried awareness of scarcity, not as panic, but as a steady background condition. Survival favored those who could shift effort without hesitation, conserving strength when needed and expending it precisely when opportunity appeared. The climate itself behaved like a long test of endurance. Cold strained muscles and stiffened joints. Wind stripped warmth from exposed skin. Darkness lingered, narrowing hours for travel and work. Warm periods arrived, but they brought their own uncertainties, thawing ground into mud, altering animal behavior, and exposing old shelters to new vulnerabilities. Comfort remained rare and temporary. Adaptation meant accepting discomfort as part of the world rather than an interruption to it. Within this pressure, cooperation became less a social choice and more a foundation. No individual could track every shift alone. Knowledge needed to circulate, carried through gesture, repetition, and shared practice. Hunting demanded coordinated movement and timing. Shelter required shared labor. Injuries, inevitable under such conditions, required patience and collective support. Strength expressed itself not in isolation, but in the ability to function within a group that absorbed strain together. Time moved differently in this environment. Change was constant, yet slow enough to demand long attention. Patterns emerged only to dissolve again. Learning never finished. Adaptation did not arrive as a single breakthrough, but as countless small adjustments layered across generations. Children grew into landscapes already altered from those their parents had known. Experience accumulated not as certainty, but as readiness. Every choice Neanderthals made carried the mark of this pressure. Bodies conserved energy because waste invited danger. Tools emphasized reliability because replacement was never guaranteed. Movement favored familiarity over exploration when conditions worsened. Risk was measured carefully, not avoided, but taken with full awareness of cost. These habits were not rigid traditions. They were living responses to a world that demanded respect for its unpredictability. Under these conditions, survival did not reward boldness alone. It favored those who noticed change early, who adjusted without attachment, who worked within the limits imposed by cold and scarcity. The Ice Age did not simply test Neanderthals. It shaped them continuously, guiding bodies, behavior, and communities into forms that could persist within a moving, unstable world. Movement into Neanderthal lands did not happen as a sudden arrival, nor did it unfold against a silent backdrop. Modern humans entered landscapes already known, already used, already shaped by long attention. The ground carried paths remembered through seasons. Shelters bore traces of repeated return. Stone sources had been tested and retested, their qualities understood through touch and sound. These places were not waiting. They were inhabited in the deepest sense of the word. As modern human groups moved through these regions, contact became part of the environment itself. Rivers narrowed travel routes. Valleys gathered people into the same corridors. Herd migrations pulled different groups toward the same open plains. Encounters did not require intention. They followed naturally from geography and survival. Presence revealed itself quietly, through altered tracks, disturbed ground, unfamiliar tools left behind. These meetings did not belong to a single moment. They stretched across long spans of time, unfolding unevenly. Seasons passed between signs of contact. Years passed between close proximity. Children grew up in landscapes where the presence of others was known even when faces were not. Overlapping worlds formed not through conquest, but through continued use of the same land under the same pressures. Archaeological traces reflect this slow rhythm. Layers of occupation stacked gently rather than abruptly. Stone tools, shaped in different traditions, appear within the same regions, sometimes within the same sites. Fire pits were reused after long pauses. Shelters sheltered more than one lineage across generations. The land did not sort its inhabitants into neat sequences. It allowed persistence side by side. Within this shared space, awareness mattered. Knowledge of where others traveled could mean safety or caution. Recognizing unfamiliar signs required interpretation rather than alarm. The Ice Age did not reward constant conflict. Energy was too valuable to waste. Survival favored restraint, assessment, and patience. Encounters likely varied, some distant and avoidant, others closer and more familiar. The pattern was not uniform, but it was continuous. Shared environments created shared pressures. Cold did not distinguish between lineages. Scarcity reached everyone. Storms erased boundaries. In this setting, adaptation emerged from proximity as much as separation, Observing how others moved through the same terrain offered quiet information. Different hunting methods, different tool choices, different responses to the same challenge all existed within view. Knowledge traveled without words, carried through watching and memory. Over thousands of years, these interactions accumulated weight. Overlap became normal rather than remarkable. The presence of another kind of human settled into the background of daily survival. Children born into this world inherited not only their own group's traditions, but awareness of others moving through familiar spaces. The land itself became a shared reference point, larger than any single lineage. This long coexistence reshaped what it meant to belong to a place. Territory was not ownership, but familiarity earned through return. Occupation was not exclusive, but layered. The world allowed more than one answer to its demands, all unfolding at once. Human life during this period did not narrow into a single path. It widened, carrying parallel responses forward together. In this shared landscape, separation and connection existed at the same time. Groups remained distinct, yet not isolated. Difference persisted without complete distance. The Ice Age world held room for repeated meeting, quiet recognition, and sustained overlap. It was within this steady rhythm, neither sudden nor dramatic, that two human worlds continued to touch, season after season, leaving traces that time would carry forward. For a long time, the human past was arranged around a simple frame. One group advanced, another receded, and the land itself served as a neutral stage for replacement. This version of events felt orderly and decisive, yet as traces accumulated slowly in the ground, a softer picture emerged, one shaped less by conquest and more by proximity. Across Ice Age landscapes, the signs left behind did not separate neatly by lineage. Hunting grounds show repeated use by different groups, sometimes within the same periods of shifting climate. The same valleys drew people back again and again, not because they were owned, but because they worked. Animals followed reliable routes, water lingered there longest, shelter endured through wind and cold. These places invited return regardless of who arrived first. Tools tell a similar story. Stone implements shaped in different traditions appear together, not blended into sameness, but close enough to suggest observation and adaptation. Certain techniques spread beyond their points of origin, carried not by instruction, but by example. A way of striking stone that wasted less energy, a grip that reduced strain, a tool balanced for repeated use. These details traveled quietly, embedded in motion rather than speech. Living near one another makes influence unavoidable. Camp smoke visible across distance signals activity and success. The sounds of hunting or preparation travel farther than intended. Paths converge at river crossings and narrow passages. Over time, familiarity grows, not always personal, but environmental. The presence of others becomes part of what the land teaches, another condition to notice and remember. Shared environments encourage shared solutions. Cold presses on all bodies in similar ways. Scarcity limits every group's margin for waste. When one method proves effective, it leaves traces that others can read. Adaptation becomes a layered process, shaped by watching as much as doing. Cultural exchange in this sense does not require agreement or closeness. It happens through attention. The idea that these groups were strangers passing briefly through one another's lives no longer holds. Distance existed, but so did repetition. Generations grew up knowing that others moved through the same regions, responding to the same conditions with slightly different habits. Awareness did not fade between encounters, it accumulated. Knowledge of the land, gradually included knowledge of others within it. This closeness softened the boundaries between worlds. Differences remained clear, but not absolute. Each group maintained its own rhythms, yet adjusted them in response to what worked nearby. The land acted as a mediator, rewarding practices that fit its demands regardless of origin. Over time, the shared landscape became a shared archive of strategies, layered rather than replaced. Coexistence does not imply harmony, nor does it deny moments of tension or avoidance. It simply acknowledges duration. When people occupy the same spaces across long spans of time, influence flows in many directions. Habits shift, expectations adjust. The world becomes familiar in overlapping ways. Seen through this lens, Ice Age Europe feels less like a battlefield and more like a living system with room for variation. Human presence did not narrow into a single answer. It expanded, allowing multiple approaches to persist within the same ground. The land supported this plurality, shaped by ice and season, indifferent to lineage. Within these shared landscapes, human lives unfolded side by side, close enough to matter. The story that emerges is not one of isolation followed by replacement, but one of parallel endurance. Different ways of being human remained visible to one another, influencing form, habit, and choice through simple, continuous coexistence. In a world shaped by uncertainty, standing alone carried quiet danger. Ice Age environments pressed hard on small groups, narrowing margins for error and reducing room for loss. Storms, illness, injury, and failed seasons could thin numbers quickly. When populations remained small and scattered, every absence mattered. Survival depended not only on skill, but on flexibility in how life continued. Isolation limited that flexibility. A group bound only to itself carried all risk internally. Genetic variation narrowed over time, and adaptability followed. In contrast, connection widened possibility. When different human groups occupied overlapping regions, contact created options that isolation could not. Traits refined under slightly different pressures entered the same living pool, offering new combinations of resilience without deliberate intention. Blending did not require foresight or planning, it followed proximity. Shared landscapes brought repeated encounters, and encounters created familiarity. Over long spans of time, relationships formed as naturally as tool habits or travel routes. Children born into such worlds carried mixed inheritances without distinction. What mattered was not origin, but whether those inheritances supported continued life. In nature, this pattern appears again and again. Closely related populations living side by side often exchange traits, not because of choice or strategy, but because boundaries soften under pressure. When environments fluctuate rapidly, blending can stabilize outcomes. It spreads risk across a wider range of responses, increasing the likelihood that some combination will endure when conditions shift again. For humans living through the Ice Age, this principle unfolded quietly. Different lineages carried adaptations shaped by their histories. Some bodies handled cold more efficiently. Others responded differently to stress, illness, or physical strain. When these traits moved between groups through generations, they did not overwrite existing strengths. They layered onto them, creating subtle variation rather than sudden change. This process did not erase identity. Groups remained recognizable in form and habit for long periods. Blending worked slowly, filtered by the environment itself. Traits that fit the land persisted through children and grandchildren. Those that did not faded without conflict. The land became the final arbiter, not lineage or intention. Survival under such conditions rewarded openness rather than rigidity. Flexibility allowed populations to absorb change without breaking. Adaptation became distributed across many bodies rather than concentrated in a few. This distribution mattered during unpredictable cycles of cold and brief warmth, when yesterday's advantage could become tomorrow's burden. Blending also reduced vulnerability to chance. A single illness could move quickly through a small, isolated group. Greater variation slowed its spread, altering responses just enough to prevent total loss. What appears subtle in one lifetime accumulates strength across many. Resilience builds quietly through diversity rather than dominance. Over time, these exchanges reshaped human presence without announcing themselves. No clear boundary marked where one lineage ended and another continued. Life moved forward through continuity rather than replacement. Survival strategies merged in practice before they merged in bodies, reflecting shared experience before shared inheritance. This is not a story of conquest or disappearance. It is a story of life adjusting to pressure by remaining connected. Blending allowed human populations to endure where isolation might have narrowed possibility. It offered resilience without requiring intention, cooperation without agreement, continuity without uniformity. Within unstable worlds, survival often favors connection, not dramatic union, but steady overlap, not sudden transformation, but gentle accumulation. Through blending, life spreads its chances across time, allowing persistence to arise from shared ground rather than separation. The blending of human lineages did not arrive with a clear beginning or a decisive moment. It unfolded gradually, woven into ordinary life so completely that it left no obvious marker in time. Seasons turned, camps shifted, children were born, and life continued with little indication that something lasting was taking shape. Change entered quietly, through inheritance rather than announcement. Each generation carried forward more than memory and habit. Bodies themselves became the medium through which exchange occurred. Children born into overlapping worlds inherited small variations shaped by both lineages, traits folded gently into growing forms. These differences were rarely dramatic. They expressed themselves in subtle ways, in how bodies regulated heat, how they responded to strain, how they recovered after hardship. Most passed without notice, absorbed into the wide range of human variation. This process moved slowly because the environment itself moved slowly. Ice advanced and retreated over long stretches of time. Cold endured for generations. Selection worked through patience rather than urgency. Traits that quietly improved survival during harsh seasons had time to demonstrate their value. Those that added burden or offered no advantage gradually became less common, thinning without resistance. The exchange was uneven, filtered by circumstance. Not every inherited trait found a lasting place. Many faded as conditions shifted or as human lifestyles changed. What remained were those that fit into the ongoing demands of life. They did not transform humanity into something new overnight. They adjusted it slightly, adding texture rather than redefining form. Biology does not rush when pressure is constant. It accumulates small differences, testing them through daily existence. A trait that helps one body conserve energy during winter becomes useful when winters repeat. Another that sharpens immune response matters when unfamiliar pathogens circulate through shared spaces. Over many lifetimes, these quiet advantages spread, not through dominance, but through persistence. This exchange did not blur identity beyond recognition. Lineages remained visible for long periods, expressed through physical features and local traditions. Yet beneath those visible differences, inheritance moved fluidly. Bodies became layered records of long contact, holding traces of many histories within a single form. No single generation noticed the change because each one only knew its own present. Time softened boundaries that once appeared distinct. As generations passed, the difference between inherited and newly formed traits became difficult to separate. What mattered was function, not origin. A body either endured or it did not. Survival cared little for lineage, rewarding usefulness wherever it appeared. The quiet nature of this process explains why it left so little immediate trace. There were no rituals to mark it, no stories to preserve it, no language to name it. It existed beneath awareness, shaping outcomes rather than beliefs. Long after the landscapes that brought these lineages together had changed, their shared inheritance continued to move forward, carried without comment. This slow exchange reshaped humanity without erasing its past. It preserved successful responses to a difficult world while allowing new ones to emerge. The result was not a sudden merging, but a gradual thickening of the human story. Each generation added another layer, each layer shaped by choices made far earlier, under skies colder and more uncertain than those that followed. Through this quiet biological exchange, survival became a shared achievement, not claimed by one lineage alone, but built from many lives overlapping across time. What endured did so because it worked, carried forward gently, generation by generation, long after its origins had faded into deep history. Cold shaped bodies, long before it shaped stories. In the northern reaches of Ice Age Europe, surviving winter was not a seasonal inconvenience, but a constant condition. Low temperatures persisted through much of the year, tightening their grip on land, water, and living tissue. Within this environment, bodies that managed heat well gained time, and time often meant survival. Neanderthal physiology reflected long residence within this cold. Heat loss was minimized through form and function working together. Stockier builds, reduced exposed surface area. Shorter limbs limited the distance warmth had to travel from the core. Muscle mass generated heat while also supporting the heavy physical labor required to move through snow, ice, and frozen ground. These were not excess features, but carefully shaped responses to place. Beneath the skin, circulation played a quiet role. Blood flow balanced the need to protect vital organs while still supplying hands, feet, and face. Extremities endured cold without immediate damage, allowing tools to be held and work to continue. This balance did not eliminate discomfort. It reduced risk, preserving function when numbness threatened to interfere with daily tasks. Skin itself adapted to shifting conditions. Pigmentation, thickness, and sensitivity adjusted subtly over generations, responding to both cold and the light reflected by ice and snow. Protection mattered as much as perception. Skin that resisted cracking and injury helped prevent infection at a time when healing carried significant risk. These changes were small, but they accumulated meaning across long winters. Fat storage added another layer of resilience. Energy reserves offered insulation and fuel during periods when food grew scarce. Unlike modern abundance, fat carried no stigma here. It functioned as a buffer against uncertainty, sustaining bodies when hunting failed or storms lingered longer than expected. Stored energy translated directly into warmth and endurance, allowing activity to continue when resources thinned. When modern humans entered these regions and began overlapping with Neanderthal populations, some of these traits moved forward through generations. They did not arrive as a complete package, nor did they transform bodies uniformly. Instead, they blended gradually, contributing small advantages that became noticeable only in aggregate. A slightly warmer core, a marginally better tolerance for cold stress, a small reduction in energy loss during long exposure. During extended winters and recurring shortages, these differences mattered. Cold increases the body's demand for fuel while simultaneously reducing availability. Bodies that conserved heat required fewer calories to maintain function. Over weeks and months, this efficiency compounded. Survival did not depend on dramatic superiority, but on the quiet ability to endure without collapse. These inherited traits did not guarantee success on their own. They worked in concert with behavior, cooperation, and knowledge of the land. Fire, shelter, clothing, and shared labor carried equal weight, yet biology provided a foundation upon which these strategies could operate more effectively. Endurance widened the margin for error, allowing time for decision, recovery, and adjustment. As climates shifted again and environments warmed in some regions, not all cold adapted traits retained their advantage. Some gradually diminished, shaped by new pressures. Others remained useful, especially in variable climates where cold returned unpredictably. The persistence of these traits reflects not permanence, but flexibility. Today, their influence continues quietly within human variation. They do not announce their origins, they simply function, adjusting how bodies respond to cold, stress, and scarcity. These influences are subtle, yet they trace back to long nights spent conserving warmth, to winters that rewarded every fraction of retained heat. Through these traits, Ice Age survival left its imprint without spectacle. Cold did not shape humanity through sudden change. It shaped it patiently, through bodies learning how to hold on just a little longer when warmth was hardest to keep. Life in Ice Age landscapes demanded constant physical effort, movement across uneven ground, the pursuit and handling of large animals, and the daily work of gathering fuel and material placed steady strain on bodies. Muscles bore repeated load, joints absorbed impact, and skin met cold, friction, and injury as part of ordinary routine. Comfort held little relevance. Function mattered more. The skeletal record carries this history quietly. Bones show signs of fractures that healed, sometimes imperfectly, yet clearly survived. Repeated stress left marks along joints and muscle attachments, evidence of lives shaped by use rather than avoidance. These were not isolated accidents. They formed a pattern of strain followed by recovery, a rhythm repeated across years and across individuals. Healing itself required time and support. Injuries that limited movement would have made solitary survival impossible. The fact that damaged bones healed suggests continued care, shared labor, and patience woven into daily life. Bodies endured not because pain was absent, but because recovery was possible within a social structure that allowed it. Endurance extended beyond individual strength into collective persistence. Within this context, sensitivity to pain carried different weight than it does today. Pain still signaled damage, yet life could not pause for complete comfort. Bodies that balanced awareness of injury with continued function held advantage. This balance did not dull pain entirely. It moderated response, allowing effort to continue without overwhelming distress. Such moderation shaped survival through countless small decisions taken day after day. Over long spans of time, these pressures favored traits that supported resilience. Recovery speed mattered. The ability to repair tissue, rebuild strength, and return to activity increased chances of persistence. In an environment where injury was common and unavoidable, recovery became as important as avoidance. Bodies learned, through selection rather than intention, how to endure repeated strain. As human lineages overlapped and blended, Some of these traits moved forward quietly. They did not announce themselves or transform bodies dramatically. Instead, they contributed subtle differences in pain perception, inflammation response, and healing efficiency. These differences rarely determined outcome on their own. They adjusted margins, influencing how bodies managed prolonged effort or repeated stress. In modern bodies, traces of this endurance appear unevenly. Some individuals recover faster from physical strain, others tolerate repetitive effort with less long term damage. These variations sit comfortably within normal human diversity. They do not define destiny or guarantee strength. They simply reflect layered history carried beneath awareness. What mattered in the Ice Age was not avoidance of pain, but the capacity to work through it without collapse. Endurance shaped behavior as much as biology. Tasks were paced, effort distributed, and rest taken when possible rather than when ideal. Survival favored consistency rather than intensity, persistence rather than speed. Bodies aligned with this rhythm lasted longer. The environment enforced honesty. Injury could not be hidden from reality. Those who pushed beyond recovery risked permanent loss of function. Those who adapted effort to ability maintained usefulness within the group. Over time, this balance refined itself through daily consequence rather than conscious design. The legacy of this resilience remains understated. It does not appear as extraordinary strength or insensitivity. It appears as quiet durability, the ability to continue under load, to recover, to adapt. These traits operate beneath attention, supporting ordinary movement and ordinary labor without recognition. Survival in harsh worlds rarely rewards ease. It favors bodies that can absorb strain and return to function again and again. Through pain, healing, and repetition, endurance shaped humanity gently, leaving behind not stories of suffering, but capacity to persist through it. Life in Ice Age environments unfolded alongside invisible pressures as constant as cold and hunger. Microorganisms moved through air, water, animals, and bodies, changing with climate and migration. Illness did not announce itself dramatically. It spread quietly, sometimes fading, sometimes reshaping communities over time. Survival depended not only on strength and skill, but on how bodies responded to threats they could not see. Neanderthals lived within Eurasian landscapes for long stretches of time, and during that residence, their bodies encountered a wide range of local pathogens. These encounters did not arrive all at once. They accumulated gradually, generation after generation, as microbes adapted alongside their hosts. Over time, immune systems adjusted through repeated exposure, learning how to respond without overwhelming the body itself. This learning did not come without cost, but it offered stability in a world filled with constant biological challenge. When modern humans began moving into these same regions, they entered microbial environments unfamiliar to their immune systems. The land carried more than new climates and animals. It carried diseases shaped by long presence, circulating quietly among wildlife and human groups alike. For newcomers, these pathogens posed subtle but serious risk, often determining survival as strongly as temperature or food availability. Through blending across generations, some immune traits shaped by long Eurasian exposure moved forward. These traits did not prevent illness entirely. They moderated response, improving recognition and containment rather than offering immunity in the absolute sense. A slightly quicker response, a less damaging inflammatory cycle, a balance that allowed recovery instead of prolonged weakness. These inherited defenses mattered most during moments of movement, Migration carried people into new ecological networks where exposure increased rapidly. Crowding in unfamiliar shelters, reliance on shared water sources, and contact with new animal species all raised risk. Bodies that could adapt more quickly held advantage, not because they avoided sickness entirely, but because they returned to function sooner. The immune system works through memory rather than certainty. It learns by experience, storing patterns of recognition that guide future response. Traits passed forward from long exposed populations offered fragments of this memory, not as complete instructions, but as a foundation. They shaped how immune cells communicated, how strongly they reacted, and how long they remained active after threat passed. Not all inherited defenses proved beneficial in every context. Some heightened responses increased inflammation or sensitivity, creating challenges in environments different from those that shaped them. Evolution does not design for comfort or perfection. It preserves what works often enough to persist. Traits that once reduced mortality in harsh conditions could later contribute to discomfort or imbalance when pressures changed. Despite this imperfection, certain immune responses remained valuable through repeated transitions. They allowed bodies to handle unfamiliar pathogens without catastrophic failure. They offered resilience during long journeys, crowded camps, and shifting seasons where illness could combine with hunger or cold. Survival required immune systems that balanced vigilance with restraint. Today, traces of these adaptations remain unevenly distributed across human populations. They do not act as shields against specific diseases. They influence tendencies, shaping how bodies respond to infection, stress, and recovery. These influences exist quietly, often unnoticed, expressed as subtle variation rather than defining difference. The legacy of ancient pathogens lives on not as memory, but as pattern. Immune systems carry echoes of long exposure, shaped by environments that no longer exist in the same form. This inheritance reflects survival under persistent pressure rather than victory over disease. Through this gradual shaping, biology carried forward lessons learned beneath awareness. The immune system became another place where shared history settled quietly, preserving responses that helped bodies endure unfamiliar worlds. Not flawless, not complete, but protective enough to matter when survival depended on returning to strength once more. Life in unstable environments shaped not only bodies, but attention itself. Ice Age landscapes required a constant awareness of surroundings, a way of noticing change without conscious effort. Weather shifted quickly. Sounds traveled far across open ground. Movement in the distance carried meaning long before it arrived nearby. Minds that remained gently alert gained time, and time often decided survival. This alertness did not feel like fear. It was quieter than that, woven into daily movement. The body listened while the mind remained calm. Footsteps slowed without thought. Eyes traced patterns in snow and grass. Silence held information. In such settings, awareness functioned as a background state, present without demanding energy unless needed. Stress responses played a role in sustaining this balance. When danger appeared, bodies shifted quickly. Heart rate rose, muscles prepared, attention narrowed toward what mattered most in that moment. These responses allowed action to occur before reflection. In unpredictable landscapes, this immediacy reduced hesitation and preserved momentum. Just as important was the return from that state. Stress that lingered too long drained strength and clouded judgment. Survival favored bodies that could activate vigilance briefly, then release it once the moment passed. Recovery mattered as much as reaction. Over time, This rhythm shaped nervous systems that moved smoothly between readiness and rest. Neanderthals lived within this pattern for thousands of years. Their environments demanded frequent assessment without constant crisis. Traits that regulated stress, intensity, and duration supported this way of life. Alertness remained available without overwhelming the body. Calm returned without deliberate effort. This balance allowed endurance through long seasons of uncertainty. As human groups overlapped and blended, some of these traits continued forward. They influenced how bodies responded to sudden change, how quickly attention sharpened, and how efficiently equilibrium returned afterward. These influences did not alter thought or belief. They shaped response at a deeper level, beneath awareness. Vigilance also guided learning. Awareness of subtle change helped individuals recognize new risks and opportunities. Shifts in animal behavior, unfamiliar scents, altered wind patterns, or unusual sounds all entered memory. Over time, this accumulated into a refined sense of place. Decision making relied less on calculation and more on recognition shaped by experience. Children born into these environments absorb this attentiveness naturally. It developed without instruction, shaped by daily exposure rather than teaching. What began as necessity became normal. Over generations, such tendencies settled into human variation, carried forward quietly. As environments changed, these traits did not vanish. They adapted. In calmer settings, vigilance redirected toward social signals, resource changes, and emotional shifts. Stress responses still activated, sometimes more readily than needed. These tendencies remained part of the human range, neither flaw nor gift on their own. Today, traces of these survival minds persist unevenly. Some people respond quickly under pressure. Others notice subtle changes without knowing why. These patterns reflect inheritance, shaped by long exposure to uncertainty, not destiny or design. Through shared history, alertness became part of humanity's internal landscape, not as constant tension, but as readiness shaped by experience. A quiet legacy of worlds that required attention to remain alive. Sleep in Ice Age landscapes unfolded under conditions far removed from softness or certainty. Night did not bring full retreat from the world. Cold lingered even beside fire. Wind worked its way through shelters built from hide, bone, and earth. Sounds traveled farther in darkness, carrying movement, breath, or the crack of shifting ice. Rest happened within the environment rather than apart from it. Shelter offered protection, but rarely complete separation. Temporary structures followed migrating animals and seasonal resources. Caves shielded against wind, yet held their own hazards. Open camps allowed awareness of surroundings, but left bodies exposed to temperature swings. Sleep adapted to these limitations, shaped by the need to remain responsive rather than fully withdrawn. The body learned to rest lightly. Deep, prolonged unconsciousness carried risk in a world where danger rarely announced itself. Fire might fail. Storms could collapse shelter. Animals moved silently through the same spaces humans occupied. Sleep that allowed quick return to awareness provided a margin of safety. Rest became layered, drifting between shallow sleep and brief wakefulness without clear boundaries. Cold further influenced this rhythm. Maintaining warmth required position changes, shared proximity, and attention to dwindling fuel. Bodies that remained lightly aware could adjust before numbness deepened. Sleep cycles shortened, interrupted by the need to tend fire or shift closer to warmth. These interruptions were not failures of rest. They were part of how rest functioned under pressure. Predation added another layer. Large carnivores hunted during darkness, guided by sound and scent, Even when danger was distant, vigilance persisted. Ears tuned themselves to unfamiliar noises. Muscles remained partially engaged. Sleep coexisted with listening. Over time, this balance shaped patterns of rest that favored rapid awakening over depth. Children grew into this environment with little distinction between night and day awareness. Sleep developed alongside caution. What modern definitions call light sleep existed as normal rest, not deprivation. Bodies adapted to recover within shorter intervals, taking rest in fragments rather than long stretches. Recovery did not depend on duration alone, but on repetition across the cycle of night. Across generations, these habits left subtle impressions. Differences in sleep timing, depth, and responsiveness settled into human variation. Some bodies rested best with shorter cycles. Others returned to alertness more easily at minor disturbances. These patterns did not dominate behavior, they blended into the broad range of human sleep experience. As human groups overlapped and shared space, these tendencies continued forward quietly. They did not arrive as distinct traits tied to identity. They entered as functional adjustments shaped by survival. Light sleep protected bodies in unstable environments. Rapid awakening allowed response before danger closed distance. These advantages required no awareness of their origin. When environments shifted and shelter improved, some of these patterns remained. Fire became more reliable. Predators retreated. Walls thickened. Yet sleep did not transform uniformly. The body often preserves rhythms longer than conditions demand. Patterns shaped over long spans do not vanish with comfort. They soften gradually, adapting rather than disappearing. In modern settings, echoes of this history appear unevenly. Some individuals wake easily, others sleep lightly without knowing why. These tendencies exist alongside many influences, including culture, habit, and environment. They do not signal deficiency. They reflect adaptation, shaped by long exposure to nights that required attention. Sleep in dangerous worlds was not meant to erase awareness. It balanced restoration with readiness. Through countless nights, bodies learned how to rest without surrendering completely to darkness. That balance remains woven quietly into human biology, a legacy of nights spent listening as much as sleeping, waiting for morning in landscapes that did not promise it. Emotional balance mattered as much as physical strength in Ice Age environments. Life unfolded under constant uncertainty, yet survival rarely rewarded sudden reaction without control. Panic drained energy quickly. It scattered attention and narrowed judgment. In contrast, calm focus allowed effort to be measured, conserving strength while keeping awareness intact. Emotional regulation became a practical skill shaped by daily consequence rather than reflection. Harsh landscapes offered many moments capable of triggering fear or distress. Storms erased familiar paths. Hunts failed after long pursuit. Injury arrived without warning. Loss was part of ordinary experience. In such conditions, emotional responses shaped behavior immediately. Those who could steady themselves after shock retained the ability to act. Those who could not often paid a higher cost. This steadiness did not mean emotional absence. Neanderthals experienced fear, grief, and tension like any human. The difference lay in how those states moved through the body. Emotional responses that rose sharply but settled quickly supported endurance. They allowed reaction without paralysis, concern without collapse, balance preserved function under pressure. Over time, repeated exposure to stress refined this balance. Environments that demanded constant adaptation favored emotional systems able to regulate intensity. Strong emotion had purpose when it mobilized action. It became harmful when it lingered too long. Survival rewarded moderation rather than suppression, a narrowing of response rather than erasure. Social life reinforced this regulation. Living closely in small groups required emotional stability. Cooperation depended on trust and predictability. Emotional outbursts disrupted coordination and increased risk. Care for injured members demanded patience rather than urgency. Groups that maintained emotional equilibrium functioned more smoothly, preserving energy and cohesion through long seasons. Through generations, these pressures shaped biological tendencies alongside cultural habits. Emotional regulation moved beyond learned behavior into deeper systems governing stress hormones and neural response. These systems did not remove emotional experience. They guided how quickly the body shifted between arousal and calm. They reduced prolonged agitation that could interfere with rest, healing, or cooperation. As human populations overlapped and blended, some of these tendencies traveled forward. They entered quietly through inheritance, adjusting thresholds rather than creating uniform behavior. Differences emerged in how individuals responded to stress, how quickly composure returned, and how long emotional states persisted. These differences existed as variation, not hierarchy. In dangerous landscapes, such regulation mattered. Calm focus preserved clarity during hunts and travel. It allowed individuals to respond to threat without exhausting themselves prematurely. It supported learning from difficulty rather than being overwhelmed by it. Emotional control did not eliminate hardship. It softened its impact over time. As environments changed and life became less immediately perilous, these traits did not disappear. They adapted to new pressures. Emotional regulation shifted toward managing social complexity, uncertainty, and internal strain rather than external danger alone. The underlying systems remained, shaped long before modern expectations arose. In contemporary contexts, these inherited tendencies surface subtly. Some people recover from stress quickly, others maintain composure during high demand situations. These patterns do not define ability or character. They reflect layered history carried within the nervous system, shaped by environments where emotional balance supported survival. Emotional regulation under pressure did not originate as a moral virtue or personal discipline. It emerged as a biological response to repeated necessity. Calm focus conserved energy. Measured response preserved cooperation. Together, these qualities supported persistence across long periods of instability. Through this quiet inheritance, emotional systems learned how to hold intensity without being consumed by it. They carried forward not the memory of danger, but the capacity to remain steady within it. This steadiness remains woven into humanity, shaped long before comfort became an expectation, forged when control meant the difference between enduring and being undone. The passage of time does not preserve everything it touches. As environments shifted after long periods of cold, the quiet balance that once favored certain traits began to change. Conditions that had shaped bodies for endurance and efficiency softened or rearranged themselves. Forests expanded and retreated. Ice withdrew from some regions and returned to others in altered rhythms. Survival demanded adjustment once again. Traits that proved useful during intense cold or scarcity did not automatically remain valuable as climates moderated. Bodies adapted to conserve heat found less advantage when warmth became more available. Energy-saving mechanisms that once preserved life during long winters offered fewer benefits when food sources diversified. What had functioned well in one world did not always translate cleanly into the next. This fading did not occur suddenly or deliberately. It unfolded through quiet accumulation across generations. Individuals carrying traits that no longer supported survival reproduced less often or passed them forward at reduced rates. The change was subtle enough to escape notice within any single lifetime. No event marked the transition. Time performed its work gradually, without preference or intent. Environment acts as a filter rather than a judge. It does not remove traits because they belong to the past. It reshapes the conditions under which those traits operate. When landscapes change, the balance between benefit and cost shifts with them. A trait that once reduced risk can become neutral or even burdensome under new pressures. As human populations grew larger and more connected, flexibility increased. Cultural solutions began to shoulder more of the burden once carried by biology. Clothing improved. Shelter became more reliable. Fire use refined itself further. These changes buffered bodies from extremes, reducing the selective pressure that once favored certain physical adaptations. Biology no longer needed to do all the work alone. In this context, many inherited Neanderthal traits faded quietly. They were not erased, but gradually diluted within broader variation. Some remained present at low levels, neither harmful nor especially helpful. Others disappeared almost entirely, replaced by traits better suited to changing environments and lifestyles. The process resembled release rather than loss. What survived were traits that continued to offer benefit across a wider range of conditions. Adaptations tied to immune response, stress regulation, or endurance remained relevant beyond cold climates alone. These traits proved flexible enough to operate under many pressures. Their persistence reflects usefulness rather than lineage. It is important to note that fading does not imply failure. Adaptation is always specific to time and place. Neanderthal traits worked extraordinarily well in the worlds that shaped them. Their gradual reduction reflects changing demands, not inferiority. Survival does not reward consistency, it rewards responsiveness. This quiet filtering shaped modern humanity without drama. No clear boundary separates what remained from what faded. The process operated beneath awareness, guided by daily consequence rather than narrative. Over long spans, bodies carried forward what continued to help and released what no longer mattered. Through this lens, disappearance becomes transformation. Traits flowed into and out of prominence as conditions required. What endured did so because it fit the present moment, not because it belonged to one group or another. Survival held no allegiance to origin. The fading of most Neanderthal traits tells a gentle story about evolution. Life does not cling to its past out of loyalty. It moves forward by adjustment. In doing so, it preserves possibility. What remains within us today reflects not loss, but continuity shaped by environments that kept changing, asking bodies to answer again and again, quietly letting go when answers no longer fit. Neanderthals did not exit the world in a single moment of loss. Their presence thinned gradually, like a voice blending into a larger chorus rather than falling silent. Generations passed as landscapes changed, populations shifted, and lives intertwined in ways too subtle to record at the time. What followed was not a sudden ending, but a slow reconfiguration of who belonged to whom. As human groups moved, met, and settled, boundaries softened. Small populations joined larger ones, not through force alone, but through everyday proximity. Camps merged. Families formed across lines that had once seemed distinct. Children grew within mixed communities, learning shared rhythms of movement, work, and rest. The distinction between groups mattered less than the shared task of living. Over time, the visible signs of Neanderthal presence became harder to separate. Physical features blended into broader variation. Cultural habits folded into one another, retaining useful practices while releasing others. Knowledge of land, of stone, of survival strategies flowed forward through hands that no longer identified as one group or another. Memory persisted without labels. From the outside, this process can resemble disappearance, yet from within it, continuity prevailed. Life did not stop and restart, it adapted. Neanderthal populations diminished as distinct communities, but their influence persisted through descendants who carried parts of that history forward without awareness of its source. Survival did not require preservation of identity. It required persistence of function. Extinction often evokes images of sudden absence, but this case unfolded differently. Absorption reshaped the outcome. Traits, behaviors, and biological responses continued to operate even as names and distinctions faded. What survived did so because it remained relevant within new circumstances, not because it belonged to a particular lineage. This blending altered the direction of human history quietly. Instead of replacement, there was expansion of diversity within a single growing population. Genetic contributions from Neanderthals became woven into a wider human fabric, diffused and reshaped over time. Their legacy did not exist as a separate chapter, it flowed into the main body of the story. Such transformation challenges simple narratives of success and failure. Neanderthals were not erased by inability to survive. Their way of being human had already proven resilient across immense spans of time. What changed was context. Larger, more connected populations altered the balance of survival, favoring traits that functioned within broader networks. Those traits remained, regardless of origin. Through this process, extinction lost its finality. It became change rather than disappearance. The line between ancestor and descendant blurred. Neanderthals continued not as a distinct people, but as contributors to the human condition. Their presence persisted in bodies, responses, and capacities carried forward without ceremony. This kind of ending lacks drama, yet it holds depth. It reveals how life moves through continuity rather than rupture. Adaptation does not always require starting over. Often, it reshapes what already exists, blending forms until separation no longer makes sense. Absorption allowed survival to proceed without erasure of value. It honored usefulness rather than identity. In doing so, it carried forward a broader inheritance than isolation could have preserved. Humanity became not a single line continuing alone, but a convergence shaped by many lives overlapping across time. In this quiet transformation, Neanderthals did not vanish. They changed form. Their legacy remained active, embedded within descendants who carried forward pieces of an older world while living within a new one. What endured was not absence, but continuity, shaped by connection rather than loss. The idea of a single, pure human lineage emerged from a desire for simplicity rather than from evidence. It offered a clean story, one path leading forward while others faded away. Yet the deeper record of human existence tells a different story, one shaped by contact, overlap, and exchange. Humanity did not move through time as a straight line. It unfolded as a braid, woven from many strands that touched, separated, and came together again. From the beginning, human populations lived close enough to influence one another. Landscapes did not divide groups into sealed compartments. Rivers, plains, and migration routes drew people together repeatedly. Shared challenges required shared space, and shared space encouraged interaction. Over time, these interactions shaped bodies, behaviors, and survival strategies in ways isolation never could. The notion of purity depends on distance. It assumes that groups remain apart long enough to remain unchanged. Ice Age realities did not allow for this. Climate instability, shifting resources, and constant movement placed people into overlapping worlds. Contact was not exceptional, it was ordinary. Through that contact, traits moved, practices spread, and knowledge accumulated beyond the bounds of any single lineage. Seeing human history as braided reframes survival itself. Success did not belong to the most isolated group or the most rigid identity. It belonged to those able to absorb influence and adapt without losing cohesion. Change arrived not as replacement, but as incorporation. Survival favored openness over separation, continuity over exclusion. This perspective challenges older narratives that framed human progress as a sequence of victories. Those stories relied on hierarchy, suggesting that one group advanced because others failed. Yet the evidence points elsewhere. Traits persisted not because they were superior, but because they were useful in a shared context. Survival was rarely about dominance alone. It was about compatibility with changing conditions. When viewed this way, interbreeding and cultural exchange become central rather than peripheral. They were not accidents or mistakes. They were part of how humanity navigated uncertainty. Blending allowed populations to spread risk, preserve flexibility, and respond to pressures too complex for any single solution. Collaboration across generations strengthened resilience. This does not erase difference. Human groups remain distinct in many ways, shaped by place, habit, and experience. What changed was the meaning of those differences. They did not exist to separate humanity into competing categories. They contributed to a larger whole, enriching variation rather than threatening identity. Understanding humanity as braided also alters how extinction is understood. Loss did not always mean disappearance. Often it meant transformation, absorption, and continuation in altered form. Lineages ended as names or boundaries, but not as influence. The human story carried forward what worked, regardless of origin. This view removes the need for purity as a measure of worth. It replaces hierarchy with interdependence. Humanity becomes less a ladder and more a network shaped by connection across time. Every generation inherited more than it created alone, drawing strength from lives that overlapped long before memory could preserve them. The myth of human purity dissolves under this lens. What remains is a quieter, deeper truth. Survival was never solitary. It was built through contact, adaptation, and shared presence across countless lives. Humanity did not rise by standing apart. It endured by coming together, again and again, carrying many pasts forward into a single, living present. The changes carried forward from deep human contact remained unseen for a simple reason: they fit too well. These traits blended into the wide range of human variation so smoothly that they never stood apart. They did not create new categories or visible divisions. They settled quietly among differences that already existed, indistinguishable from the natural diversity shaped by place, climate, and chance. Human bodies have always varied. Height, strength, endurance, sensitivity, and resilience shift subtly from one individual to another. Against this background, inherited traits from ancient populations did not stand out. A slightly different response to cold, stress, illness, or pain appeared no more remarkable than any other personal difference. There was nothing to mark these traits as unusual, let alone ancient. For most of history, there was also no framework for noticing them. People understood the world through immediate experience, not hidden mechanisms. Bodies were accepted as they were, shaped by labor, environment, and time. Without tools to look deeper, there was no reason to suspect that survival in the present carried echoes of survival in the distant past. Even when differences mattered, they were interpreted through culture rather than biology. Variations in behavior or endurance were explained by upbringing, diet, or circumstance. The idea that inheritance could carry functional traces from other human groups lay far outside everyday understanding. The past existed as memory and story, not as something living inside the body. Time further obscured the origin of these traits. Thousands of years passed as populations mixed, moved, and grew. Genetic contributions diluted and dispersed, no longer tied to any recognizable group. What remained was influence without identity. Traits continued to function, but their source dissolved into the flow of generations. The invisibility of these changes was reinforced by their subtlety. They did not determine destiny, they adjusted probabilities, a quicker recovery here, a steadier response there. Effects too small to isolate without careful measurement, yet meaningful across long spans of time. These differences shaped outcomes quietly, rarely dramatic enough to demand explanation. Only with the arrival of modern science did the hidden record become visible. Tools capable of reading the language written inside cells revealed patterns no eye could see. Comparisons across populations uncovered shared fragments of deep history carried forward intact. What had always been present suddenly gained context, not as anomaly, but as inheritance. Yet even with this knowledge, the influence remains easy to overlook. Daily life does not announce genetic origin. People still experience their bodies as personal and immediate, shaped by habit, health, and environment. Ancient contributions operate beneath awareness, guiding responses without drawing attention to themselves. This quietness explains why the story took so long to tell. There was no moment of discovery in daily life, no sudden realization shared across generations. The inheritance functioned silently, effective without recognition. It did not need names or stories to persist. Understanding this invisibility changes how the human past is viewed. History did not end when groups disappeared as identities. It continued through bodies doing ordinary things, working, resting, healing, and adapting. The past survived, not as memory alone, but as function. What modern science revealed was not something newly created, but something long present. The quiet inheritance had been there all along, blending seamlessly into humanity. Even now, it moves unnoticed through daily life, influencing outcomes without demanding attention. The deepest changes often leave the lightest footprints, carried forward not through spectacle, but through silence. Inherited traits from deep human history exist quietly within a much larger story. They do not stand alone, and they do not define who a person becomes. At most, they contribute a gentle influence, a slight tendency among many others that shape how bodies respond to the world. These influences operate alongside countless factors that matter far more in daily life. Human variation has always been broad. Differences in temperament, strength, sensitivity, endurance, and behavior arise from a complex blend of upbringing, environment, chance, and experience. Within this wide spectrum, Ancient inherited traits function as background texture rather than guiding lines. They adjust probability rather than direction, supporting certain responses without determining outcome. Environment plays a decisive role. Climate, diet, health, workload, and social conditions shape bodies continuously from birth. A trait that once offered advantage under Ice Age conditions does not carry the same weight in a modern setting. Context transforms influence. What mattered deeply in one world may barely register in another. Biology adapts, but it does not command. Culture adds another powerful layer. Customs, beliefs, knowledge, and shared practices shape behavior more strongly than subtle biological tendencies ever could. Human societies teach, reinforce, and discourage patterns of action across generations. These systems operate consciously, deliberately shaping lives in ways inheritance alone cannot. Because of this, ancient traits never became labels. They do not divide people into clear categories or predictable outcomes. There is no visible boundary where one inheritance ends and another begins. Instead, traits distribute themselves softly across populations, mingling with countless other influences. Variation remains continuous, not segmented. This continuity explains why attempts to assign meaning or identity to inherited traits miss the point. The human body does not preserve history as a set of markers meant for classification. It carries forward what functions without preserving the story of why it arrived. Influence persists without name or boundary. Understanding this continuity changes the purpose of looking backward. The goal is not to sort people into groups or trace behavior to a single source. It is to recognize that humanity is layered, shaped by long connections that never resolved into isolation. The present carries the past, not as a blueprint, but as a foundation continually built upon. Seeing inheritance this way removes the temptation to simplify identity. No individual stands as a representative of ancient history. Each person reflects a unique combination of biology, environment, culture, and chance. Ancient traits simply join that mixture, contributing quietly without claiming ownership of the result. This perspective also guards against misinterpretation. When ancient influences are treated as defining, they risk being exaggerated or misused. History shows how easily such thinking can distort understanding. Recognizing the small scale of these influences restores balance. It emphasizes continuity over division and complexity over reduction. Deep time does not carve people into types. It shapes the conditions under which variation persists. Humanity remains unified not by sameness, but by shared inheritance woven through endless diversity. The continuity lies in connection, not categorization. By understanding inherited traits as influences rather than definitions, the human story remains open and inclusive. It acknowledges shared pasts without assigning fixed meanings to them. It respects the role of environment and culture in shaping lives now. In the end, this story is not about labeling difference. It is about recognizing how deeply connected human lives have always been. Beneath visible variation lies continuity, carried forward quietly, shaping possibility without dictating it. Modern life unfolds at a pace and within conditions that would feel unfamiliar to the bodies we carry. The environments that shaped human biology shifted gradually for most of our history. Food scarcity, physical effort, temperature extremes, and constant movement define daily existence. Our bodies learn to function within those constraints, adjusting over long spans of time rather than sudden change. When conditions altered rapidly, biology did not redesign itself overnight. It continued forward, carrying adaptations shaped for earlier worlds into new ones. Many traits that once served survival now operate within environments they were never built to anticipate. This creates moments of friction where ancient responses meet modern conditions that remove the pressures that once gave those responses meaning. Some of these mismatches appear in subtle ways. Bodies prepared to conserve energy may struggle when food is constantly available. Stress responses refined for short bursts of danger may remain active amid prolonged social or cognitive strain. Sleep patterns shaped for watchfulness can persist in settings designed for uninterrupted rest. These outcomes feel personal, yet they reflect a deeper timing difference between biology and environment. Other inherited traits continue to offer quiet support. Resilience, shaped through endurance, still aids recovery from physical and mental strain. Stress regulation systems that balanced vigilance and calm remain useful in navigating uncertainty. Immune responses refined under long exposure to challenge continue to protect against unfamiliar threats. These contributions rarely draw attention, yet they influence how bodies cope day after day. Mismatch does not signal error, it reveals continuity. Bodies function according to rules written over deep time, rules that do not update with every shift in lifestyle. When the world changes faster than biology can follow, tension naturally arises. This tension carries information about where history and environment diverge. Modern comforts reduce many pressures without eliminating the systems built to manage them. Climate control softens temperature extremes, yet bodies still respond to seasonal change. Sedentary routines replace constant movement, yet muscles and metabolism remain tuned for effort. Artificial light extends day into night, yet internal rhythms still track cycles shaped under darker skies. These mismatches are often interpreted as flaws. In reality, they reflect how successfully our bodies navigated earlier worlds. Traits that once ensured survival do not disappear simply because their original context fades. They remain active, adjusting gradually as new patterns emerge. Culture steps in where biology cannot keep pace. Habits, schedules, and shared knowledge reshape how ancient bodies function in modern spaces. Exercise replaces constant movement. Social structures distribute effort differently. Medicine and nutrition buffer risks once carried directly by biology. These layers compensate for mismatch without erasing history. Understanding this meeting point between ancient bodies and modern life restores perspective. Difficulty does not imply failure. Discomfort does not suggest inadequacy. It reflects systems operating faithfully according to the conditions that shaped them, even when the environment has moved on. Over time, some biological traits may adapt toward new pressures, others may soften as selection relaxes. Yet many will remain, woven into human variation without resolution. The pace of cultural change will likely continue to outstrip biological adjustment, preserving this tension as a defining feature of human experience. Modern life does not overwrite ancient bodies, it layers upon them. The result is not conflict, but coexistence. Bodies carry forward their past while learning to function within the present. The mismatch reveals not a mistake, but a story of rapid change intersecting with deep continuity. In this meeting, humanity remains both ancient and modern at once. Our bodies remember worlds long gone while responding to environments newly formed. This overlap shapes daily life quietly, reminding us that evolution works patiently, even when the world does not. This story alters something quiet but fundamental in how people understand themselves. It shifts identity away from the idea of standing alone in the present and places it within a much longer flow of lives, environments, and survival. The self becomes less isolated, less newly formed, and more deeply connected to time that stretches far beyond memory. Human identity is often shaped around immediacy. Family, culture, language, and personal history feel like the primary threads that define who someone is. Yet beneath these familiar layers lies a deeper continuity that does not announce itself. Bodies, instincts, and responses carry traces of lives lived under conditions very different from those of today. This inheritance moves forward quietly, shaping experience without asking to be named. Recognizing this connection softens the boundary between past and present. Deep history stops feeling distant or abstract. It becomes intimate. The past no longer belongs only to museums or textbooks. It lives within ordinary moments, influencing how people respond to stress, recover from strain, or seek rest. These responses are not learned consciously, they are carried. This realization changes how separation is understood. The idea of being entirely modern, entirely new, begins to dissolve. Humanity emerges instead as layered, shaped by countless lives overlapping across time. Each generation receives more than it creates alone, inheriting tendencies shaped long before language or writing existed. Identity becomes less about origin points and more about continuity. Emotionally, this perspective can feel grounding. It places individual experience within a broader pattern where difficulty and adaptation are not personal failures but shared inheritance. Strain, vigilance, resilience, and recovery take on new meaning when viewed as responses refined over immense spans of time. They reflect endurance rather than deficiency. It also invites gentler understanding of difference. Variations in response and temperament no longer demand rigid explanation. They can be seen as expressions of long human diversity shaped by many environments and pressures. This view discourages hierarchy. No single way of being human stands apart as the standard. All are outcomes of shared survival. The sense of belonging deepens as well. Human life becomes less solitary when viewed across time. Each person stands within a chain of persistence that never truly broke, even as forms changed. The achievements and adaptations of long vanished groups continue to influence the present without claiming credit. Survival becomes a collective accomplishment rather than an individual one. This continuity also reframes loss. The disappearance of distinct groups does not mean their contributions vanished. Influence continued, carried forward without ceremony. The past did not end. It transformed. That transformation lives on in bodies navigating the present world, often without awareness of its depth. Emotionally, this perspective offers steadiness. It reminds humanity that it has faced unstable worlds before and endured through connection and adaptation. The present becomes another chapter rather than an exception. Change feels less alien when placed within a long pattern of adjustment. The past being present does not trap people within it, it supports them. History provides foundation rather than limitation. Ancient influence does not dictate identity, it enriches it, adding depth beneath conscious choice and cultural expression. In this way, the story matters not because it reveals something exotic, but because it restores continuity. It reminds people that they are not cut off from what came before. They carry it forward unconsciously, shaped by countless lives that met challenge and adapted together. The human story does not sit behind us. It moves with us, quietly alive within the present. Humanity has never unfolded along a single road. From its earliest moments, being human meant existing within a shifting landscape of possibilities rather than following a fixed design. Different groups adapted to different conditions, responding to climate, terrain, and uncertainty in their own ways. The human story formed not as a straight line, but as a wide terrain shaped by movement, encounter, and change. Across this landscape, experiments unfolded quietly. Some ways of being human flourished for long periods, grounded in environments that rewarded their particular strengths. Others thrived briefly before conditions changed. Still others overlapped, sharing space and influence before merging into something new. None of these outcomes represented success or failure on their own. They reflected responsiveness to place and moment. When viewed together, these variations reveal a central pattern. Humanity did not advance by refining one ideal form. It persisted by allowing multiple forms to exist at once. Flexibility mattered more than consistency. Adaptation mattered more than preservation. Survival favored those able to shift with conditions rather than remain bound to a single solution. Merging played a crucial role within this process. When human groups encountered one another, their shared presence created opportunities for exchange. Traits, behaviors, and strategies moved between populations, layering responses rather than replacing them outright. These exchanges broadened the range of available adaptations, increasing resilience across uncertain conditions. What endured did so because it functioned within shared challenges. Fading was equally important. Some adaptations lost relevance as environments changed. Their gradual disappearance did not erase their value within earlier contexts. It reflected the constant negotiation between bodies and world. Humanity did not carry everything forward. It filtered continuously, keeping what worked and releasing what no longer fit. This release made room for new forms to emerge. Seeing humanity as a landscape of experiments reshapes identity itself. It loosens the idea that being human means adhering to a singular definition. Instead, humanity becomes a process rather than a state. Each generation inherits outcomes shaped by earlier conditions while facing new pressures that demand adjustment. The result is continuity without sameness. This perspective dissolves the appeal of purity. Isolation narrows possibility. Flexibility expands it. Human history shows that connection strengthened survival while rigidity limited it. Contact allowed experimentation to accumulate rather than restart. Shared existence carried forward solutions refined across different worlds. Adaptation, in this sense, is not exceptional. It is ordinary. Being human has always meant responding to change with whatever tools are available, biological, cultural, or social. The capacity to adjust became more valuable than any single trait. Humanity endured not by perfecting itself, but by remaining unfinished. This unfinished quality remains present today. Modern humans still carry responses shaped under conditions long gone, while developing new patterns to meet current realities. The process continues quietly, guided by interaction between biology and environment. There is no final form waiting at the end. Rethinking what it means to be human means accepting this openness. Humanity is not a destination reached by eliminating alternatives. It is a living system shaped by variation, connection, and time. Some paths merged, some faded, some continue in altered form. Together, they form a shared inheritance. Within this view, being human is less about what survived and more about how survival happened. It happened through adaptation rather than purity, through responsiveness rather than rigidity, through a willingness to change without losing continuity. Humanity remains what it has always been, a shared experiment unfolding across time. The traits carried forward from deep human history arrived without ceremony. They brought no stories, no names, no sense of origin. They entered quietly, woven into the body rather than announced through thought or memory. Generations lived and died without recognizing their presence, because these traits did not ask to be noticed. They simply worked. What passed forward was not belief or knowledge, but response. Bodies learned how to react before the mind had time to interpret. Muscles adjusted to strain. Nervous systems calibrated alertness. Immune responses shifted in balance and timing. These changes shaped how life was handled moment by moment, not how it was explained. Because these traits operated beneath awareness, they never entered language. People did not describe them or reflect on them. They were experienced only as part of being alive. Fatigue, resilience, vigilance, recovery, and rest all felt personal and immediate, not inherited. The source of these responses lay far beyond daily concern. Inheritance at this level does not function like instruction. It does not tell a body what to think or how to act. It provides tendencies, small adjustments that influence probability rather than dictate outcome. A slightly steadier response under pressure, a marginally faster recovery from strain, a subtle shift in sensitivity to environment. None of these differences demand attention, they simply exist. Culture and learning shape beliefs, values, and choices far more visibly. Families teach behavior, societies reinforce norms, language structures understanding. Against these powerful forces, ancient biological influences remain quiet. They adjust the starting point, not the destination. They influence how something is felt, not how it is interpreted. This quietness explains why these traits remained unnamed for so long. There was nothing to point to, no boundary where influence became obvious, no moment when cause and effect aligned clearly enough to invite explanation. Bodies adapted continuously, responding to conditions without preserving the memory of why those responses existed. Even now, with the ability to look deeper into biology, these influences resist easy recognition. Daily life does not reveal them clearly. People still experience their bodies as unique, shaped by habit and circumstance. Ancient contributions remain subtle, scattered across millions of individuals rather than concentrated in visible form. What makes these inheritances powerful is precisely their silence. They do not rely on attention to function. They operate automatically, supporting survival and adjustment without asking for acknowledgement. They persist regardless of belief or awareness, moving forward as part of the body's ongoing conversation with its environment. These traits also resist simplification. They do not produce consistent outcomes across all situations. Their influence depends on context, interaction, and environment. What helps in one setting may matter little in another. This fluidity keeps them from becoming defining features. They contribute without controlling. Understanding this form of inheritance reframes how the past lives on. History does not only persist through stories, monuments, or artifacts, it continues through ordinary bodily responses, repeated so often they feel natural. The deepest continuity rarely announces itself. It settles into normality. What we inherited without knowing did not arrive to define us. It arrived to support function. It shaped how bodies meet challenge, adapt to stress, and recover over time. These influences are not meant to be recognized in daily life. They are meant to work quietly in the background. In this way, The past remains present without demanding attention. It does not speak in words, it speaks through response. Beneath awareness, beneath thought, these traits continue to operate, carrying forward fragments of ancient lives into the rhythm of the present, unseen yet enduring. Evolution rarely announces itself. It moves quietly, without spectacle, without moments that demand attention. Most of the time, it works beneath notice, adjusting life in increments so small that no single generation feels the shift. What changes settles in gently, and once it settles, it feels ordinary. Small adjustments become part of the background. A response grows slightly more efficient. A tolerance shifts almost imperceptibly. A rhythm steadies itself just enough to matter. These changes do not feel new when they arrive. They feel familiar, as though they had always been there, folded into the natural order of things. Inheritance follows this same quiet path. What is passed down does not come with explanation or warning. It does not announce its origin or its purpose. It blends into the body's existing patterns, indistinguishable from countless other influences shaped by environment, chance, and experience. Over time, origin becomes irrelevant. Function is what remains. Because change is gradual, it rarely draws attention. Each generation accepts its starting point as normal. Bodies respond to the world they are born into, not to the worlds that shaped them long ago. Fatigue, alertness, recovery, and resilience feel immediate and personal, not inherited. The deeper story stays hidden because it does not interrupt daily life. This invisibility is not accidental. Dramatic change is often destabilizing. Subtle change preserves continuity. Systems that shift slowly remain functional while adapting, allowing life to keep moving without rupture. Evolution favors adjustments that fit smoothly into what already exists, rather than those that demand sudden reorganization. Across long spans of time, these small shifts accumulate. Layer upon layer of quiet refinement shapes how bodies interact with their surroundings. No single change tells the story. The story emerges only when distance allows perspective. Up close, everything feels static. From far away, everything has moved. Most of human evolution unfolded this way. Adaptation did not arrive as sudden transformation. It arrived as patience. Traits persisted not because they were dramatic, but because they integrated well. They asked little of the system they entered and returned steady benefit over time. This is why evolutionary change is often misunderstood. Attention gravitates toward moments of apparent disruption while overlooking the long stretches where nothing seems to happen. Yet those stretches are where most of the work is done. Stability itself is not the absence of change, but the result of constant, quiet adjustment. The most powerful changes rarely feel powerful when they occur. Their strength lies in their subtlety. By the time a shift becomes noticeable, it is already old. Its success comes from becoming invisible, from functioning so smoothly that it no longer stands apart. This quiet process protects complexity. Sudden alteration risks breaking relationships between systems. Gradual change allows those relationships to adjust alongside it. Bodies, populations, and environments remain in conversation, shifting together rather than pulling apart. Human inheritance reflects this same pattern. Traits moved forward through refinement rather than replacement. They layered gently onto what already existed, influencing outcomes without overwhelming them. Their endurance depended on compatibility, not force. Understanding this quiet nature reframes how change is valued. Progress does not require disruption to be meaningful. Some of the deepest transformations leave no mark in the moment they occur. Their impact becomes clear only across time when viewed as part of a larger flow. This story belongs to those quiet shifts. It traces change that did not announce itself, did not demand recognition, and did not interrupt the rhythm of life. It follows how adaptation shaped humanity through patience rather than spectacle, allowing continuity to persist even as everything slowly changed. Science rarely offers a finished picture. It moves forward through refinement rather than resolution, shaping understanding slowly as tools improve and perspectives widen. What feels clear at one moment often softens at the edges later, not because it was wrong, but because the story it describes is larger than any single explanation. In the study of human inheritance, this openness matters deeply. Researchers can identify patterns, trace fragments of ancient contribution, and observe how certain traits persist, yet the full weight of those influences remains difficult to measure. Bodies do not operate in isolation. Biology intersects with environment, culture, and experience in ways that blur cause and effect. Many effects appear small when viewed in isolation. A slight adjustment to stress response, a marginal shift in immune sensitivity, a modest influence on recovery or endurance. These influences rarely act alone. They overlap, interact, and sometimes counterbalance one another. Science can describe tendencies, but it cannot reduce them to simple rules. This uncertainty does not weaken scientific understanding, it protects it. The refusal to declare final answers reflects respect for complexity. Human biology is not a machine with clearly labeled parts. It is a living system shaped by countless variables across immense spans of time. Any explanation that claims completeness risks losing accuracy. As methods advance, understanding grows more precise without becoming absolute. Genetic analysis reveals connections that were once invisible. Comparative studies refine estimates of influence. Collaboration across fields adds depth, linking biological patterns to archaeological, ecological, and cultural evidence. Each step forward sharpens the picture while revealing new layers beneath it. Some questions remain stubbornly open. Subtle traits that operate beneath awareness leave faint signals. Their effects change depending on context. What matters in one environment may fade in another. These shifting conditions make it difficult to isolate outcomes cleanly, requiring patience rather than certainty. This gradual refinement mirrors the process it seeks to explain. Human adaptation unfolded without clear boundaries or decisive moments. Science follows a similar rhythm, advancing through accumulation rather than revelation. Knowledge grows denser over time, not more final. Unanswered questions are not gaps to be filled hastily. They are spaces where understanding is still forming. Leaving them open prevents oversimplification and protects against misuse. It allows interpretation to remain flexible, responsive to new evidence rather than fixed by assumption. This openness also guards against turning biology into destiny. By acknowledging uncertainty, science resists the temptation to assign rigid meaning to inherited traits. It emphasizes probability over prediction, influence over determination. This restraint keeps interpretation humane and grounded. Science without final answers does not leave us adrift. It places knowledge within a living process, one that evolves alongside the subject it studies. Each generation revisits earlier conclusions with better tools and broader context, adding clarity without closing the story. In this way, mystery remains part of truth, not as ignorance, but as recognition of depth. The human story is not something to be completed. It is something to be understood more carefully over time. Science continues to refine its picture, aware that clarity does not require closure. The absence of final answers is not a failure of understanding, it is an honest reflection of a living history still unfolding, carried forward through patience, revision, and quiet respect for complexity. This story waited a long time to be told, not because the evidence was absent, but because interpretation moves at the pace of perspective. For much of modern history, cultural assumptions quietly shaped how the past was understood. These assumptions were rarely questioned. They felt natural, reflecting the values and hierarchies of the time rather than the complexity of deep history. Early interpretations carried the weight of expectation. Humanity was imagined as a ladder, rising step by step toward an ideal form. Within that framework, Neanderthals could only be placed below, framed as crude, incomplete, or doomed. Their story was simplified so that ours could remain comfortable. Complexity was smoothed away in favor of clarity that reassured rather than challenged. These views did not arise from evidence alone. They reflected broader beliefs about progress, intelligence, and worth. The past was interpreted through the lens of the present, and the present favored narratives of replacement and superiority. Within such a frame, there was little room for overlap, continuity, or shared inheritance. Misunderstanding persisted because alternative explanations were difficult to imagine. Without the means to examine bodies beyond bone and tool, interpretation relied heavily on surface traits. Differences were exaggerated, similarities overlooked. What could not be seen directly was rarely considered relevant. The deeper story remained hidden, not by secrecy, but by limitation. Patience became essential when tools finally changed. New methods allowed scientists to look beyond outward form and into finer detail. Patterns emerged slowly, not overturning old ideas all at once, but eroding them piece by piece. Each refinement softened earlier certainty. What once seemed definitive became provisional. As evidence accumulated, the narrative shifted gently rather than abruptly. Neanderthals began to appear not as failed versions of humanity, but as people shaped by different conditions. Their behaviors, capacities, and resilience gained context. The rigid boundaries that once separated groups grew porous, allowing continuity to come into view. Letting go of older narratives took time because stories shape identity. The idea of singular human success carried emotional weight. Replacing it with a more shared history required humility. It meant accepting that survival was not exclusive and that influence flowed in more directions than once assumed. Science advanced carefully, aware of past missteps. Claims became more restrained. Language softened. Certainty gave way to nuance. Rather than declaring final truths, research focused on probability, overlap, and interaction. Understanding deepened through accumulation rather than proclamation. This gradual shift reflects the nature of the subject itself. Human history does not lend itself to sharp divisions. It is layered, intertwined, and resistant to simple categories. Telling such a story requires tools capable of capturing subtlety and a mindset willing to accept it. Time also played a role. Ideas need space to mature. Evidence needs repetition and confirmation. Perspectives shift across generations. What once felt radical becomes familiar as understanding settles. The story did not wait because it was hidden. It waited because comprehension needed to catch up. In the end, understanding arrived not through dramatic revelation, but through steady adjustment. Old assumptions loosened. Gentler truths took their place. The past became less distant and less divided. This story took so long to tell because it required patience, both from science and from culture. Only when tools improved and certainty softened could the deeper continuity finally be seen, quietly waiting beneath the surface all along. Survival rarely unfolds in isolation. Across deep time, endurance has been shaped through connection, carried forward not only by individuals, but by many lives overlapping and supporting one another. What persists in the present is rarely the product of a single path. It is the result of shared effort extending far beyond memory. Human existence has always depended on inheritance in its broadest sense. Skills, behaviors, and responses moved between people long before they were recorded or named. Bodies carried forward, adaptations refined through lives, lived alongside others, even when those others faded as distinct groups. Survival flowed through contact, not separation. This shared endurance did not require unity of identity. Different groups remained distinct in culture, habit, and appearance, yet their proximity created exchange. Ways of coping moved quietly across boundaries. Responses shaped under one set of pressures found usefulness under another. Over time, the distinction between giver and receiver softened, leaving influence without ownership. Many of the traits that persist today arrived through this process. They were not designed for modern circumstances. They were shaped to endure instability, scarcity, and uncertainty. Their survival reflects usefulness within shared challenges rather than dominance by any single group. What lasted did so because it worked across contexts. Understanding survival as collective shifts perspective. It reframes success away from conquest or replacement and toward continuity. Humanity did not advance by eliminating all alternatives. It advanced by absorbing what strengthened resilience. Endurance became a shared achievement rather than an exclusive one. This collective legacy is quiet. It does not announce itself through lineage or record. It operates beneath awareness, influencing how bodies respond to stress, effort, and recovery. These responses are experienced individually, yet they were shaped communally. Each person carries echoes of survival refined through countless lives that intersected long ago. Time further blends this inheritance. As generations pass, origin fades while function remains. Traits persist without preserving the identity of those who first carried them. Survival becomes anonymous, detached from name or group, yet no less real. What matters is that endurance continues. This view dissolves the idea of solitary success. Even moments that feel individual rest upon foundations built collectively. Bodies draw from a deep reservoir of adaptation formed through cooperation, proximity, and shared challenge. No one stands entirely alone within this history. The concept of shared survival also reshapes how loss is understood. When groups disappeared as separate identities, their influence did not vanish. It moved forward through others, transformed but not erased. Extinction, in this sense, did not always mean absence. It often meant continuation in altered form. Recognizing this continuity brings humility. It acknowledges that present life rests upon countless unseen contributions. Endurance was not achieved by a single lineage proving itself superior. It emerged through connection, blending, and patience across time. This perspective also carries gentleness. Human existence becomes less competitive and more cooperative when viewed through deep time. Survival appears not as a solitary struggle, but as a shared effort unfolding across generations. Strength lay in relation rather than isolation. The echoes of this shared endurance remain active. They guide responses without memory. They support bodies navigating environments very different from those that shaped them. Their presence reminds us that survival has always been collective, even when experienced personally. Shared survival across time forms a quiet legacy. It connects past lives with present ones without demanding recognition. Humanity carries this inheritance forward unconsciously, shaped by endurance that was never solitary. What survives today reflects not individual triumph, but collective persistence woven through time. Daily habits feel unmistakably modern. Screens glow before sunrise, schedules compress hours into blocks, routines repeat with a speed that feels entirely new. From the surface, daily life appears detached from anything ancient, shaped by recent invention and constant acceleration. Yet, the body moving through these habits belongs to a much older story. Muscles, nerves, and senses were shaped in environments that demanded patience, endurance, and constant adjustment. Cold, hunger, effort, and uncertainty were ordinary features of existence, not occasional disruptions. The body learned to manage them slowly, refining responses over thousands of generations. Those responses did not disappear when conditions changed. They settled into the background, continuing to operate as the world transformed. Beneath modern routines, ancient systems still regulate movement, recovery, alertness, and rest. They function quietly without needing recognition because they were refined long before explanation mattered. This creates a subtle contrast woven into daily life. Modern environments move quickly, but bodies respond at a different pace. Stress and calm, effort and recovery, wakefulness and sleep follow rhythms shaped under skies far removed from the present. Even when surroundings feel artificial, internal responses remain familiar, tuned to cycles that once governed survival. Routine hides this depth. Walking, lifting, sitting, focusing, resting, and sleeping feel immediate and self contained. These actions seem unconnected to history, yet each relies on systems shaped by long survival. The body does not reset with each generation. It carries forward what worked, adjusting gradually rather than starting over. Because this inheritance integrates so smoothly, it rarely draws attention. Ancient patterns do not interrupt modern life. They support it. Endurance allows long workdays. Vigilance supports navigation through uncertainty. Recovery systems repair strain without conscious involvement. The past assists the present without announcing itself. At times, the contrast becomes more noticeable. Bodies built for movement meet sedentary habits. Stress responses shaped for brief danger meet prolonged pressure. Sleep rhythms refined for natural light meet illuminated nights. These tensions feel personal, yet they reflect the overlap between ancient design and modern setting. Understanding this overlap restores balance. When bodies feel out of step with modern routines, it does not signal failure, it reflects continuity. Biology remains loyal to patterns that once ensured survival, even as environments change quickly. History persists through function, not memory. Deep time also moves beneath emotional life. Reactions to fatigue, closeness, strain, and rest carry echoes of earlier conditions. These responses feel personal, yet they were shaped collectively, refined through countless lives facing similar challenges. Most of the time, this depth remains unnoticed. Daily life does not require awareness of ancestry to function. The inheritance beneath routine performs its work silently, allowing the present to move forward. Yet beneath everyday life, the past remains active. Ancient systems continue to guide ordinary moments. Modern lives unfold upon Ice Age foundations, steady and unseen. This quiet overlap defines much of human experience, where the newest habits rest upon the oldest designs, carrying deep time forward into the present. Human history does not unfold as a single tale carried forward intact. It accumulates in layers, built from countless lives that overlapped briefly and then moved on. Each layer adds texture rather than replacing what came before. Together, they form a story too broad to belong to any one lineage alone. Every generation stands at a crossing point. Lives intersect through proximity, shared environments, and shared challenges. Some of these intersections last only a moment, others extend across centuries. All of them leave traces, not as complete narratives, but as influences that shape what follows. Humanity emerges from this constant meeting rather than from uninterrupted continuity. Many stories ended without fanfare. Groups faded as environments shifted or conditions changed beyond what they could sustain. Their disappearance did not mark failure, it marked transition. The circumstances that once supported them moved on, carrying forward only what remained useful within new contexts. Endings became part of continuity. Other stories continued by blending rather than persisting unchanged. Traits, behaviors, and ways of coping moved into new populations, detached from their original identities. These contributions survived not because they were preserved deliberately, but because they fit. Their usefulness allowed them to persist quietly within larger, changing communities. What exists today carries echoes of both endings and continuations. Modern humanity reflects countless lives whose names were never recorded. Their influence survives not as memory, but as function. Bodies and behaviors still draw upon adaptations shaped long before written history, even when the story of their origin has dissolved. This layered inheritance resists simplification. No single narrative can fully explain how humanity arrived at the present. Progress did not follow a straight path. It followed many paths at once, some converging, some diverging, some vanishing along the way. Survival emerged from this complexity rather than in spite of it. Recognizing this complexity removes the illusion of singular success. Humanity did not advance because one group alone proved superior. It advanced because many groups contributed solutions to shared problems. Endurance became possible through accumulation rather than exclusivity. What mattered was not who persisted unchanged, but what proved adaptable. Within this view, no story becomes meaningless. Even paths that ended played a role in shaping the conditions that followed. They refined responses, tested limits, and expanded the range of what survival could look like. Their existence mattered because it informed what came next, even when continuity took unexpected forms. Time smooths these contributions together. Over generations, distinctions blur. Origin fades while influence remains. What survives no longer belongs clearly to any single source. It becomes part of the shared foundation upon which later lives build. Humanity becomes a composite rather than a lineage. This understanding invites patience with complexity. It allows human identity to exist without strict boundaries. Being human becomes less about tracing a single origin and more about acknowledging shared inheritance across time. Each person carries fragments of many past lives woven together without clear separation. A species built from many stories carries resilience as a result. Diversity of experience strengthens adaptation. Multiple solutions to past challenges increase flexibility in future ones. Survival benefits from having drawn upon many approaches rather than committing to only one. In this way, human history reveals itself as collective rather than solitary. Countless lives contributed, some briefly, some enduring through transformation. None were wasted. All shaped the present in quiet ways. Humanity continues forward, not as a single story preserved intact, but as a living tapestry formed from many overlapping threads, each contributing to the long persistence of the whole. Change rarely announces itself. It settles gradually, folding into routines until it feels ordinary. The most lasting shifts arrive without ceremony, leaving no sharp boundary between before and after. They move quietly through generations, reshaping bodies and behaviors without demanding attention. By the time they are noticed, they already belong. Some inheritances do not come as stories or symbols. They arrive as tendencies, as thresholds, as subtle responses that awaken during strain or rest. They influence how sleep deepens, how stress tightens, how recovery unfolds after effort. These traits do not carry labels. They operate beneath awareness, steady and dependable. Long before language shaped memory, these quiet influences learned the rhythm of endurance. They adjusted to cold nights and uncertain shelter. They balanced vigilance with rest, conserving energy while remaining ready. Through repetition, these responses became reliable, embedding themselves into the physical grammar of survival. As names and faces dissolved into time, what endured was function rather than identity. The body remembered what the mind no longer could. Muscles, nerves, and immune defenses carried lessons learned through hardship, not as recollection, but as readiness. The past continued its work without explanation. Modern life feels loud by comparison. Signals arrive constantly. Schedules compress days into measured blocks. Yet beneath this surface activity, ancient patterns still guide response. Fatigue still demands rest. Stress still sharpens attention. Healing still follows rhythms set long ago. Continuity persists beneath novelty. This endurance does not romanticize struggle, it simply acknowledges persistence. Survival favored balance over excess, flexibility over rigidity. What remains today reflects that filtering. Useful traits stayed, unnecessary ones faded. No judgment followed this process. Only quiet selection shaped what endured. The continuity here is subtle but profound. It connects moments across deep time without erasing difference. Each generation adds context while carrying forward quiet strengths. Change accumulates without severing what works. The result is not sameness, but stability within motion. Understanding this continuity softens the boundary between past and present. It shows that evolution is not only visible in fossils or genes, but in daily functioning. Every calm breath during stress, every night of restorative sleep, every gradual recovery from strain echoes older adaptations. Loss is often the language used for what disappeared, yet endurance tells a different story. What mattered enough to remain still moves within living bodies, not unchanged, but adapted. Not celebrated but essential, the past continues its quiet labor without asking to be named. In this way, what quietly endures becomes the strongest inheritance. It does not seek attention, it supports resilience without display. Long after faces fade and stories blur, these influences persist, steady and unobtrusive. What remains is not loss, but continuity, carried forward without sound, shaping life as it always has.